He had bought the land years ago with the hope of creating a quiet place away from the noise and pressure of the city. It was a piece of land with a long, winding road that stretched from the main highway to his house. The road was narrow but solid, lined with old trees on either side, giving it a peaceful, shaded feeling. For him, it was more than a road. It was a path to solitude, a way to start his mornings with birds singing and fresh air, filling his lungs before the world demanded attention. When he first moved in, there were only a few houses nearby, scattered at a distance. He noticed the neighbors often used his road to reach the highway faster. At first, it did not bother him. He liked the idea of being part of a friendly neighborhood. If people passed by, waved, and left him in peace, it seemed harmless. Over time, he allowed them to use the road more openly, never charging or creating formal agreements. It was an unspoken understanding, a gesture of trust, and he liked being known as someone easy to get along with. At first, only a few cars passed each day. They moved quietly, mindful of the trees and animals that roamed the area. In the mornings, he would sip his coffee by the window and watch the occasional car pass, waving to the drivers, who waved back politely. It seemed like a perfect balance. He had space, he had nature, and the neighbors had convenience. It was simple, and it worked. But over the years, more and more people discovered the road. Word traveled fast, and soon the once peaceful path became a shortcut for almost every household nearby. Heavy trucks started coming through early in the morning, and the quiet he once cherished began to fade. The sound of engines braking, the stillness became a constant companion. He tried to tolerate it, reminding himself that the community needed the road. He wanted to be kind, but with each passing day, his patience thinned. The road began to show signs of wear. Potholes appeared in places where trucks turned too sharply. Dirt and gravel scattered along the sides, and the edges started to crumble. He spent weekends fixing it, patching potholes and raking gravel back into place, but it never seemed enough. Each repair felt like a temporary solution, and each morning, the work was undone by heavy tires that had no regard for the effort he put in. He started to notice a pattern. The same vehicles that ignored speed limits and damaged the road also ignored the basic courtesy of slowing down near his home. Early mornings were the worst. Some drivers started coming at dawn, engines roaring, music blaring, and lights cutting through the dark. He remembered one morning clearly. It was just before sunrise, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and gold. He stepped outside to get a cup of coffee and was startled by the sudden roar of a truck racing past. It shook the trees and startled the birds. He felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. How could people be so careless and disrespectful? It was his land, his peace. And yet it seemed everyone had forgotten that. He tried talking to a few neighbors about the early morning noise. He explained calmly how the trucks were disturbing the area, how the road was being damaged, and how it affected his daily life. Some listened politely and nodded, promising to be careful. But soon he realized their promises meant little. A week later, the same trucks thundered past before sunrise. No change, no consideration. He began keeping a journal of incidents, noting dates, times, and the type of vehicles. It was a way to remind himself that the situation was real and not imagined. He thought about installing speed bumps or barriers, but hesitated. He wanted to avoid conflict. He wanted the neighborhood to stay friendly. After all, they had all shared greetings and small talk for years. But each passing day reminded him that trust had limits. He started to feel a tension he could not ignore. The road was no longer just a path. It was a battleground between kindness and entitlement. He spent evenings walking the length of the road, feeling the rough gravel under his shoes and listening to the distant hum of the town. The more he walked, the more he understood that he needed to take control before the situation escalated. He thought back to the early days when everything was quiet and simple. How easy it had been to trust people. Now, trust alone was not enough. He realized that without clear boundaries, people would continue to overstep. The road, once a symbol of community and friendship, to become a source of stress and tension. One afternoon, a neighbor came by, casually mentioning that more people had started using the road for convenience. He smiled politely, trying to hide his growing frustration. But inside, a storm was brewing. It was not just about the noise anymore. It was about respect. He felt the slow erosion of his rights and the disregard for his land. It was not just the vehicles, it was the idea that his property was open to anyone, at any time, without his consent. The thought made him realize that he had to make a decision. He could no longer rely solely on goodwill. That night, he sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one. The road lay dark and silent, and he remembered the mornings when peace still existed. He recalled the joy of waking up to birds and wind rustling through the trees. The memory made him determined. He would take action, not out of anger, but out of necessity. The road was his, and the peace he had bought it for was worth defending. He began researching legal options. He wanted to know exactly where he stood, what rights he had, and how he could enforce them without unnecessary conflict. It was a slow process involving county records, discussions with property experts, and careful consideration of possible outcomes. Each piece of information strengthened his resolve. He realized that kindness and generosity were important, but they could not replace clear boundaries. While preparing, he still tried small gestures. He left polite notes reminding people to drive slowly, to respect the early hours, and to be mindful of the surroundings. Some took note, but many ignored them. The situation was becoming urgent. He felt the tension mounting, the quiet mornings slipping further away. Each day without a solution was a day his peace was compromised. Finally, he made a plan. He would have to enforce his rights clearly and firmly. He would set limits, define rules, and communicate them in a way that could not be misinterpreted. The thought brought a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because action was finally on the horizon. Apprehension because he knew that enforcing boundaries could lead to conflict. But he understood that it was necessary. Without action, the situation would only worsen. He spent the following weeks preparing the road, making signs and setting small barriers in anticipation. He thought carefully about wording, ensuring it was clear but not hostile. He rehearsed conversations in his mind, anticipating questions, objections, and anger. He knew some people would react poorly, but he also knew that he could no longer allow the road to be treated as public property. It was his land, and respect had to be restored. Throughout this time, he reflected on what the road had meant to him and what it could mean again. He remembered the calm mornings, the gentle sounds of nature, the sense of ownership without greed, and the joy of a life undisturbed by others' disregard. Those memories fueled his determination. He was not closing the road out of anger, but to preserve the life and peace he had built. The tension grew as neighbors began noticing the preparations. Some approached, curious and cautious, asking questions and trying to understand the changes. He responded calmly, explaining that rules were being set for everyone's benefit, including the preservation of the road and safety for all users. Some nodded, some frowned, but he stood firm, knowing compromise had to respect his property rights first. Mornings remained challenging. Trucks and cars still moved along the road, but with each passing day, he felt more in control. He documented everything, maintained a level head, and slowly the idea of setting firm boundaries started to take shape in the minds of those who used the road. The road was becoming a reflection of mutual respect once again, but this time, guided by clear and enforceable rules rather than casual understanding. By the time the first action day arrived, he was ready. He had learned the importance of patience, clarity, and assertiveness. He had understood that goodwill alone could not protect his property. The road was more than just a path. It was a piece of his life, a symbol of his right to peace, and a test of how boundaries define respect. He knew the coming days would be challenging, but he was prepared to face them with calm and confidence. Knowing that the quiet he cherished the mornings had started early, quiet and calm, but things were about to change. One day, he noticed a new sign posted near the entrance of the road. It was small, but clear. The local neighborhood committee had declared that no heavy vehicles were allowed on the road after 6 in the morning. They claimed it was for the safety of the residents and the preservation of the road. He felt a mix of surprise and disbelief. How could they enforce such a rule on a road that he owned? He had never given anyone the right to set rules for his property. At first he thought it might be a misunderstanding. Perhaps someone had misread local regulations, or thought they could make decisions on his behalf. He decided to wait and see if it was just a temporary measure. That morning, just before sunrise, he took his usual walk along the road. He noticed the usual traffic of cars and small trucks, but he also saw a few drivers looking confused. As they approached the sign, some turned back, following the new instruction. It was a strange feeling to see others trying to control access to his land without his permission. He had a long talk with himself that day, trying to process what was happening. It was not just about inconvenience or minor disruption. It was about control. Someone else was acting as if his road belonged to the community, ignoring the years of ownership and effort he had put into maintaining it. It was an intrusion on his life, his space, and his right to make decisions for his property. He began to realize that this was no longer a situation he could tolerate with patience alone. Later that day, a group of neighbors came to talk to him. They approached politely but with a sense of authority. They explained that they had decided collectively that the 6 a.m. ban was necessary for everyone's benefit. They said it was about safety, noise, and preventing damage to the road. He listened carefully, nodding occasionally, but inside, he felt a growing tension. Their argument had a polite tone, but it carried the weight of entitlement. They acted as if the road and its rules were theirs to make, not his. He tried to explain his perspective calmly. He told them that he was the owner of the road, and that while he valued the community, he could not allow them to impose rules on his property. Some nodded, seeming to understand, but others looked frustrated and dismissive. He realized quickly that reasoning alone might not resolve the problem. Their sense of entitlement was strong, and they seemed to believe that collective decisions could override ownership rights. It was a difficult and delicate situation, one that required careful thought and preparation. Over the next few days, the tension grew. Every morning, he watched his vehicles approach the road, some stopping at the new sign, others ignoring it entirely. He saw arguments break out between drivers and the neighbors, enforcing the 6 a.m. ban. The road that had once been a place of peace and calm was now a place of conflict and uncertainty. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Not only did he have to protect his property, but he also had to navigate the complex web of community relations without escalating the conflict unnecessarily. He spent hours each day observing, documenting, and thinking through possible solutions. He noted the times when vehicles ignored the sign, the types of vehicles that caused the most problems, and the responses of the neighbors enforcing the ban. Each observation helped him understand the depth of the issue and the mindset of those involved. It was clear that the 6 a.m. ban was not just a matter of safety or road maintenance. It was a power move, an assertion of control over a space that was rightfully his. One morning, he decided to take action. He parked his vehicle at the entrance of the road, ensuring it was visible to anyone approaching. He wanted to send a clear message without confrontation. As he stood there, he noticed the tension in the air. Drivers hesitated, unsure whether to proceed. Some tried to pass quietly, hoping to avoid attention, while others stopped to ask questions. He answered calmly and firmly, explaining that the 6 a.m. ban was not valid on his property, and that he would be setting his own rules moving forward. His calm demeanor helped prevent immediate conflict, but he knew this was only the beginning. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some neighbors were upset, feeling that their collective decision had been dismissed. Others were confused, unsure of the legal standing of the ban and what it meant for their daily routines. He began receiving messages and visits from people seeking clarification, advice, or simply to express frustration. He handled each interaction with patience, knowing that any rash reaction could worsen the situation. He focused on clarity, calmness, and firmness. Emphasizing his rights as the property owner and the need for mutual respect, he also realized the importance of preparation. He started installing small markers, gates, and signs to indicate his rules clearly. Unlike the 6 a.m. ban, his signs were factual, legally grounded, and polite. He wanted to prevent misunderstandings and ensure that everyone knew the boundaries. He also consulted legal documents and property records to confirm his rights. Every step was deliberate, careful, and measured. He knew that being well prepared would give him confidence and help prevent unnecessary conflict. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the neighborhood became tense. Some neighbors began to grumble openly about his actions. Meetings were held to discuss the situation, but without legal authority, the discussions were largely symbolic. Arguments erupted over convenience, fairness, and control. He remained calm, observing the dynamics, documenting incidents, and preparing for the moment when he would need to enforce his rights decisively. As the days passed, he noticed subtle changes. Some neighbors started respecting the idea that the road was under his control. They slowed down, asked permission, and treated the space with more caution. Others resisted, testing boundaries, challenging him openly, and creating friction. He realized that the road had become more than a path. It was a symbol of respect, authority, and the consequences of ignoring ownership rights. Each encounter, each challenge, strengthened his resolve and sharpened his understanding of the situation. He also reflected on his own approach. He knew that kindness and patience had their limits. While he valued community and goodwill, he could not allow these qualities to be mistaken for weakness. The 6 a.m. ban was a wake-up call, a reminder that assumptions and informal agreements could be exploited. He had to establish boundaries, communicate clearly, and enforce rules consistently. It was not about confrontation. It was about fairness, respect, and the protection of his property and peace of mind. One evening, he walked the length of the road, noting the marks left by trucks, the wear on the gravel, and the quiet beauty of the land. The contrast between the peaceful environment and the ongoing conflicts was striking. He thought about the early mornings when he first moved in, the calm and serenity that had been gradually eroded. The memory reinforced his determination to act. He would restore order, but in a way that was fair, firm, and transparent. The turning point came when a neighbor approached him directly, expressing anger about the 6 a.m. ban being challenged. The conversation was tense, but he remained composed. He explained the legal basis for his rights, the reasons for setting boundaries, and his willingness to work with the community within those limits. The neighbor left frustrated but aware that further challenges would be ineffective. It was a small victory, a sign that his careful approach was beginning to have an impact by now. The road had become a focal point of community discussion. Some neighbors were still upset, while others quietly adjusted their routines. He continued documenting everything, preparing for the moment when he would fully enforce his rules. Each day reinforced the lesson that clarity, preparation, and calmness were more powerful than confrontation. He felt a growing sense of control and confidence, knowing that he was taking the necessary steps to protect his property and restore peace. He also thought about the larger implications. This was not just about a road. It was about respect, boundaries, and the consequences of entitlement. The 6 a.m. ban had exposed underlying tensions and assumptions that had gone unnoticed for years. By addressing the issue decisively, he was sending a message that kindness must be paired with clarity, that trust has limits, and that respect for ownership is fundamental in any community. As he prepared for the coming days, he reflected on his journey. The initial shock, the frustration, the careful observation, and the gradual assertion of control had all taught him valuable lessons. He understood the importance of preparation, communication, and maintaining a calm and human approach. The road was no longer just a physical path. It was a symbol of his rights, his patience, and his ability to navigate complex social dynamics with integrity and composure. With the 6 a.m. ban challenged and his rules ready to be enforced, he felt a mixture of anticipation and resolve. The situation was far from resolved, but he was prepared. He had learned to balance firmness with understanding, authority with fairness, and preparation with patience. The road, his land, and his peace were worth protecting, and he was ready to face the chaos that was sure to come. The community had learned, and he had learned, that respect and boundaries were essential, and that clarity in action would ultimately restore order and peace. After weeks of observing, documenting, and preparing, he made the decision. He would formally revoke the easement. It was not a choice made lightly. He understood the consequences. Neighbors would be upset, arguments would flare, and some might try to challenge him. But the repeated early morning disruptions, the disregard for his property, and the attempt to enforce a 6 a.m. ban without his permission made it clear that action was necessary. He needed to protect his land and reclaim the peace he had once enjoyed. He started by consulting legal documents. He wanted to be certain that his rights were fully supported. Property records, local ordinances, and consultations with experts confirmed that the easement had never been legally granted. It was a matter of courtesy and trust, nothing more. With this confirmation, he felt confident. He was about to exercise his rights, and he intended to do so calmly, clearly, and firmly. Next, he planned the physical enforcement. He installed gates at strategic points along the road and posted signs that clearly stated the easement had been revoked. The signs were polite but factual, explaining that access was now limited and that permission was required for entry. He knew that clarity was essential. Misunderstandings could lead to unnecessary conflict. So he made sure that anyone approaching would immediately understand the new rules. The first morning after the changes, he woke early, not for a walk, but to witness the response. Cars approached the entrance, drivers stopping suddenly as they saw the gates and signs. Some got out, reading the notices, confusion on their faces. A few tried to argue, claiming they had always used the road and had assumed it was open to them. He listened, calmly explaining that the use had been based on goodwill and trust, not legal right, and that the easement was now revoked. Some nodded, seemingly understanding, while others fumed, their frustration palpable. The tension escalated quickly. Neighbors began talking among themselves, organizing meetings and spreading rumors. They believed they had been wronged and wanted to challenge the decision. However, the legal standing was clear. He had done his homework, and he remained calm in every interaction. This calmness was his strength. By not reacting emotionally, he prevented the situation from spiraling into hostility. He understood that control came not from force, but from clarity and consistency. Over the following days, he noticed attempts to bypass the restrictions. Some drivers tried to sneak through early in the morning, while others came during the day, pretending to have permission. Each instance was carefully documented. He approached each situation with patience, explaining the rules and refusing unauthorized access. Some neighbors expressed anger, some sorrow, and some disbelief. But his firm stance gradually established that the new rules were non-negotiable. The community reaction varied widely. Some neighbors began to respect the decision immediately, adjusting their routines and following the rules. Others resisted, questioning his motives, creating tension, and attempting to involve local authorities. He welcomed inquiries and explained everything in a polite and factual manner. By doing so, he prevented misinformation from spreading and maintained control over the narrative. The road itself began to change. Without the constant heavy traffic, the gravel and dirt started to stabilize. Small repairs he had made now held, and the surrounding environment began to regain some of its earlier serenity. Birds returned. The wind through the trees sounded peaceful again, and the quiet mornings gradually reappeared. The physical restoration of the road mirrored the restoration of order and respect. He spent time walking the road each day, checking the gates, signs, and overall condition. He also reflected on the social dynamics at play. People often assumed that long-standing habits and informal arrangements gave them rights they did not legally possess. The situation had been a powerful lesson in boundaries, ownership, and the consequences of entitlement. By enforcing his rights calmly and clearly, he was teaching not only the neighbors but himself about the importance of assertiveness and clarity. Some neighbors tried to challenge the revocation formally. They contacted local authorities, attempted to cite community norms, and even discussed legal avenues. He responded to each attempt with well-prepared documentation, clear explanations, and a polite demeanor. No confrontation, no anger, just facts and reason. Slowly, the efforts to challenge him lost momentum. The clarity of his position, combined with consistent enforcement, made it clear that the easement was no longer valid. There were moments of tension that tested his patience. A few residents attempted to remove signs, open gates without permission, or intimidate him verbally. Each instance was met with calm firmness. He documented every interaction, ensuring that there was a clear record of events. The combination of preparation, knowledge, and patience allowed him to maintain control without escalating conflict. He understood that emotional reactions could undermine the process and chose to respond with composure instead. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood slowly adapted. Some neighbors accepted the new reality and even came to appreciate the restored peace. Others remained resentful, but they learned that persistence and aggression would not override legal rights. The road had become a symbol of respect and order. The revocation of the easement was no longer just about controlling traffic. It was about restoring boundaries, teaching accountability, and preserving a way of life that had been threatened by entitlement. He also reflected on his own growth during this period. The process had taught him patience, strategic thinking, and the importance of clear communication. It had been easy to rely on goodwill alone, but the experience showed that boundaries are essential for maintaining peace. The revocation of the easement was not an act of revenge or anger. It was an act of responsibility, necessary to protect his property and his quality of life. One morning, he noticed the change most clearly. The road was quiet, the sun rising through the trees, casting soft light on the gravel path. Only a few cars passed, all following the rules. The peace he had longed for was returning. Not because others had been forced to obey, but because they understood and respected the boundaries. It was a small but meaningful victory, a confirmation that clarity and firmness could restore order without unnecessary conflict. He continued to maintain the road, checking for wear, repairing minor damage, and ensuring that the rules were clear. He also continued to communicate with neighbors, answering questions, clarifying rules, and reinforcing the importance of respecting ownership. The road had become a space of calm, a reflection of balance between assertiveness and respect. The chaos that once threatened the mornings had been replaced with a sense of order and mutual understanding. As time went on, he realized the deeper lessons of the experience. Trust and goodwill are valuable, but they are not substitutes for clear boundaries. Respect must be earned and maintained through consistent action. Authority and fairness can coexist. And patience combined with preparation is often the most effective way to resolve conflict. The revocation of the easement had been a turning point, not just for the road, but for his understanding of human behavior and community dynamics. He also noticed subtle improvements in relationships. Some neighbors who had initially resisted the changes began to communicate more respectfully. They asked for permission when needed, followed the rules, and even offered help with minor road repairs. The environment, once tense and chaotic, started to regain a sense of community. Based on clarity, mutual respect, and acknowledgement of boundaries. It was a slow process, but one that reinforced the importance of calm and deliberate action. Reflecting on the entire process, he felt a sense of accomplishment. The road, once a source of stress and frustration, had been transformed. The revocation of the easement was not a simple action, but it had been necessary. By asserting his rights, communicating clearly, and maintaining composure, he had restored peace, respect, and order. The experience had been challenging, but it had also been enlightening, teaching lessons about patience, preparation, and the importance of boundaries in human interactions. In the end, he understood that the road was more than just a path. It was a representation of his life, his efforts, and his right to a peaceful environment. By revoking the easement and enforcing his rules, he had protected not just the physical space, but also the quality of life he had worked hard to build. The road had become a testament to the balance between fairness and authority, a reminder that respect must be clearly defined and consistently maintained. Through careful, thoughtful action, he had navigated the chaos and restored order, proving that boundaries and clarity are essential in any community. With the easement formally revoked and gates in place, the neighborhood began to feel the impact immediately. The calm that he had longed for returned, but it brought with it a new kind of tension. People who had taken the road for granted now faced longer commutes and had to rethink their daily routines. Arguments broke out at community meetings, and whispered complaints spread through the neighborhood. The road that had once been a simple shortcut had become a symbol of control, authority, and accountability. Some neighbors reacted with frustration. They believed the changes were unfair and felt that their convenience had been taken away. Trucks and vehicles that had previously roared through at all hours were forced to take alternative routes. The frustration was palpable, and some people expressed it loudly. They criticized his decision, claiming it disrupted the neighborhood and caused unnecessary problems. But despite the anger, he remained calm. He had prepared for this reaction and understood that it was a natural consequence of asserting boundaries. The first week after the gates were installed was the most difficult. He observed as drivers tried to find ways around the barriers, sometimes taking risks or creating minor accidents. Others tried to intimidate him verbally, standing near the gates and demanding access. Each encounter tested his patience, but he responded with composure. He explained the situation politely, reinforced the rules, and documented every interaction. His calm and consistent approach slowly began to show that the rules were non-negotiable. At the same time, he noticed the community dynamics shifting. Some neighbors began to accept the changes quietly, adapting their schedules and routes. They realized that resistance was futile, and that respecting the property owner was the only practical option. Others continued to push back, spreading complaints and organizing informal discussions about how the road should remain accessible. It was a mix of acceptance and rebellion, a reflection of human nature when faced with change. He spent his mornings observing the road, noting every vehicle that approached, the times they came, and how they responded to the gates. Some drivers slowed, read the signs carefully, and complied without argument. Others ignored the instructions, attempting to force their way through. He addressed each situation calmly, explaining the rules and reinforcing that access required permission. By documenting everything, he ensured that there was a clear record, preventing misunderstandings and providing evidence if legal disputes arose. One afternoon, a group of neighbors approached him collectively. Expressing frustration at the longer commutes caused by the road closure, they argued that the decision was unfair and demanded reconsideration. He listened carefully, acknowledging their concerns. But he also made it clear that the easement had been revoked for valid reasons. He explained the history of early morning disruptions, damage to the road, and repeated disregard for informal agreements. Some nodded in understanding, while others left angry. But the message was clear. The rules would not be overturned. The tension extended beyond verbal disagreements. Some residents attempted to bypass the gates by walking or cycling through unauthorized areas. He noticed footprints and bicycle tracks leading around the barriers. Each incident was addressed carefully. He placed additional markers and reinforced the signs, making it clear that the road was private and that access required explicit permission. Gradually, the unauthorized access decreased, and the message began to sink in. The local authorities were contacted by some neighbors who were still upset. They asked for clarification about the legal standing of the easement and whether enforcement was allowed. He provided all the documentation, including property records and evidence of the lack of legal easement. The authorities confirmed that his actions were within his rights, further reinforcing his position. This validation gave him confidence and helped prevent escalation from outsiders. Meanwhile, the road itself began to recover. Without constant heavy traffic, the gravel and dirt stabilized. Small repairs he had previously made held, and the surrounding environment began to regain its earlier serenity. Birds returned to the trees, the wind rustled gently through the leaves, and the sound of engines in the distance became less frequent. The physical restoration of the road mirrored the social restoration he was working toward. Creating a sense of balance and order, social tensions persisted, however. Some neighbors refused to accept the new reality, organizing informal campaigns to pressure him into reversing the decision. They held meetings, exchanged complaints, and tried to involve community committees. Each time, he responded calmly, presenting facts, documentation, and a clear explanation of his legal rights. By staying composed, he maintained authority and prevented unnecessary conflict. He also noticed that the situation was teaching him about human behavior. Some people adapted quickly, showing understanding and respect. Others resisted, driven by habit entitlement, or frustration. He realized that enforcement alone was not enough. Communication, clarity, and patience were essential. He focused on explaining the reasons behind the rules, reinforcing the importance of boundaries, and modeling respectful behavior. One particularly challenging morning, a group of neighbors approached the gates with frustration, arguing that the road closure had created real problems for their daily routines. He listened carefully, acknowledging the inconvenience, but emphasized the reasons for the revocation and the importance of respecting property rights. Some were visibly frustrated, while others began to understand that the rules were non-negotiable. The interaction highlighted the delicate balance between firmness and empathy, a lesson he took to heart. Over time, the pattern became clear. Compliance increased, unauthorized access decreased, and respect for the rules grew. Some neighbors began to offer help with minor road maintenance, recognizing the effort required to keep the road in good condition. The community dynamics shifted, and while some tension remained, the overall environment improved. The road, once a source of chaos, was becoming a place of order and quiet. He spent his evenings walking the road, reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about the challenges, the conflicts, and the gradual progress. He realized that the experience had strengthened his patience, clarity, and ability to navigate social dynamics. The road had become a symbol of responsibility, respect, and the importance of boundaries. It was no longer just a physical path. It represented lessons learned and peace restored. By the end of the month, the situation had stabilized. The majority of neighbors accepted the changes, adapting their routines and respecting the rules. The remaining dissenters were fewer, and their attempts to challenge the decision were largely ineffective. The combination of clear communication, consistent enforcement, and calm composure had restored order. The chaos that had once dominated the neighborhood was replaced with understanding, respect, and a renewed sense of balance. He continued to maintain the road, repairing minor damage, checking the gates, and ensuring that the rules remained clear. He also maintained open communication with neighbors, answering questions, clarifying expectations, and reinforcing the importance of respecting boundaries. The road had become a space of calm, order, and mutual understanding, a reflection of the lessons learned through careful, deliberate action. As he walked along the road one morning, he noticed the subtle changes. Birds sang from the trees, the gravel was intact, and the few vehicles that passed followed the rules. The tension in the neighborhood had decreased, replaced by a sense of acceptance. People were learning that respect and boundaries were essential, and that clarity and firmness could restore order without unnecessary conflict. The road, once a source of chaos, had become a symbol of balance and respect. He reflected on the journey, understanding that the chaos had been a necessary part of the process. It had revealed assumptions, entitlement, and misunderstandings. By addressing the situation decisively, calmly, and clearly, he had restored peace, respect, and order. The experience had been challenging, but it had also been enlightening, teaching lessons about patience, preparation, communication, and the importance of boundaries in human interactions. The road was no longer just a path to the highway. It was a reflection of his life, his values, and his commitment to maintaining order and respect. The chaos had been transformed into calm, and the neighborhood had learned that rules, boundaries, and clear communication are essential for coexistence. The experience reinforced the idea that respect is earned through action, not assumed, that patience and firmness are powerful tools in resolving conflict. Through careful, deliberate effort, he had turned chaos into order, proving that boundaries and clarity are essential in any community. Weeks had passed since the easement was revoked and the road gates were installed. The initial chaos had settled into a tense calm. The neighborhood had learned in its own way that the road was no longer freely accessible without permission. Those who had resisted at first slowly adjusted, finding alternative routes, changing schedules, and accepting the reality. He observed these changes quietly, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment, but also a deep understanding of the challenges that had shaped this outcome. He continued his routine of walking the road each morning, coffee in hand, noticing the subtle changes. The birds were returning, The gravel was intact, and the air felt lighter. The few cars that passed approached cautiously, respecting the gates and signs. The road had begun to regain the tranquility it had once held, and he felt the weight of the earlier tension lift. Yet he remained vigilant, knowing that respect had to be maintained and that boundaries, once set, needed consistent enforcement. Some neighbors approached him, not with complaints, but with questions and requests for permission. He welcomed these interactions, answering politely and clearly. They asked about access for deliveries, maintenance, and occasional travel, and he granted permission thoughtfully. Each interaction was a reminder of the balance between authority and community, showing that fairness and consistency could coexist. He noticed that many neighbors now spoke with a tone of respect and understanding, a shift from the anger and frustration that had dominated the earlier weeks. He also spent time repairing and maintaining the road, ensuring that the gravel was even, potholes were filled, and any minor damage was addressed promptly. This physical care was symbolic as well as practical. It demonstrated his commitment to the property, reinforced the importance of rules, and set a standard for responsible behavior. Neighbors began to appreciate these efforts, realizing that maintaining order required work, patience, and attention to detail.